Hey everyone.
Hey guys.
Welcome to another Travel Therapy Mentor video. Tonight we're going to be doing a job market update for the beginning of the year. It's been a few months since our last update and there's a few changes. Things are still overall staying pretty good, but we want to update you guys on some numbers and some feedback we got from all the companies that we work with. So Whitney's going to introduce us and I'm going to get this video shared in a few different groups.
Hey guys, for those that may not know us, my name's Whitney Aiken.
And I'm Jared Kazaza.
And we're both traveling doctors of physical therapy. We're the faces behind Travel Therapy Mentor. A lot of you guys may have tuned in the past for some of our videos. We've been doing these job market updates since late 2019, early 2020. So we're going strong here on our third year of job market updates, trying to keep you guys aware of what's happening, what's trending in the job market. We know a lot of staffing companies that we work with, that we've personally taken contracts with over the years, that we've gotten to know over time, and that we recommend to other people. So we are well suited to collect a lot of data and bring a lot of information to you guys. I think we collected information from about a dozen companies, and these are usually the owners or the managers of the therapy division. So these are some higher up people. We also got some information from recruiters that are working day to day with a lot of the therapists, and then also from some current travel therapists as well about what's happening with them. And of course, we talk to travel therapists every single day. We message back and forth with people about what's happening with their contracts, if they're getting canceled, if they're getting higher rates on their contracts, if they're having issues, all of those things we talk to people about on a day-to-day basis. So hopefully we can bring you guys a lot of good insights about what the travel therapy job market is like. This is especially important for those of you that are thinking about getting into travel therapy this year. If you want to know whether the job market is still good for your discipline, if you want to know if there's a variety of jobs in the setting that you're interested in, if you want to know if it's a good idea if you're a new grad, so forth and so on. It's also really good information for those of you that are current travelers because things change. And so sometimes current travelers may be expecting the job market to be the way it has been for a certain amount of time, but maybe there's some changes coming up that you need to know about so that you're not expecting exactly the same thing. For example, with pay packages, with job variety, with all those types of things. So hopefully we'll be able to bring you guys some good insights about that kind of stuff. Also, if you're new to our channel, we've done videos in the past about various topics, pretty much any topic you can think of about travel therapy. So if this is your first time coming to our site, be sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram. We do videos every couple weeks about tons of topics. You can go back and look through all of our old videos. Or if you would rather listen to us on podcast platform, we have a lot of our videos starting in like either 2020 or 2021. I can't remember, is when we started uploading the audio from our videos to podcast form to make it a little easier to listen to. So we've got videos on every topic you can think of. So if you're new to travel therapy, start diving into those so you can learn more. I see a bunch of you guys are tuning in live. Jared's just getting the video shared in a couple more groups so more people can tune in with us live. I'll give a shout out to those of you that are watching. Hi, Julie. Hi, Amber. Hi, Diana. Diana says she's from Rockville, Maryland. Thanks, Diana. If anybody else is watching live, we'd love if you'd comment and say who you are. Are you a PT, an OT, an SLP, a PTA, a CODA? Are you a student? Where are you located? Are you a current traveler or are you somebody who's thinking about getting into travel therapy? Just let us know in the comments. Hi, Zach. Hi, Nikki. Nikki says hi from Madison, Alabama. Thanks for joining, Nikki. Hey, Brianna. Hi, Nick. Nick says, coming at you from Baltimore. I guess Nick just moved there for his new contract. He was in Texas. He says, why did I leave the Texas weather for Maryland in January? That's a good question, Nick.
That is a good question.
And you're an experienced traveler, so you should have known better not to go to Maryland this time of year. But, Maryland's not so bad. We got...
Could be worse.
We had, who was it? Diana is coming at us from Rockville, Maryland. So, not too bad. Hi, Amy. Hi, Tyler. Hi, Lexus. Thank you guys for joining in. Nikki says she's an SLP. Tyler says, hey, PT and OT team here. We actually just met Tyler and his wife when we were in New Zealand. We all happened to be in New Zealand at the same time. So that was pretty cool. Tyler says, just coming off our fun employment and coming at you from Western Massachusetts. So
yeah, I'm sure it's cold up there.
Yeah. Have you guys started your new contracts yet? Are those in Massachusetts? Hey, Mason, PT in Indiana. Hi, Thomas. Hey, Brianna. Bree, PT on my first travel contract in Virginia. Where are you at in Virginia? We're in our hometown of Roanoke, Virginia, currently. That's where we have a house. Hi, Annabelle. Annabelle and Ryan here from Miami Beach. Annabelle is in our travel therapy course group, and we actually have a phone call coming up with her a week from today to do our mentorship phone call, and Annabelle's getting ready to start her travel therapy journey. So super excited for Annabelle.
Yeah. All right, so let's get into the job market update. It was a little exciting reading some of these updates from the companies because as you guys, anybody that's watched our videos in the past knows, probably August, July of last year, I was really thinking that there was going to be a big drop in the job market. Things were kind of getting exuberant. There was really high pay packages, tons of jobs. And people were asking questions about inflation and expecting pay rates to keep going up. And I was getting a little pessimistic about it, to be honest. And luckily, none of that has really played out. I mean, things are certainly not going up like they were, but they're also not dropping either. And that's, I think, with how the market's been the last year and a half, really, really great. The fact that things aren't dropping is a major, major plus. And so I guess I was pessimistic for no reason. Things have actually been really good.
Just to give you guys a little bit of background, if you are newer to the travel therapy world, we like to think of travel therapy in terms of pre-COVID and post-COVID travel therapy because things changed a lot with COVID, as did, a lot of industries and a lot of the world. But we started traveling in 2015, and we would say that things were pretty steady, what we considered normal from 2015 through 2019, through the beginning of 2020, actually. I guess 2019. Things were pretty normal. We didn't hear of any major changes back then in the job market. We were just putting along, taking our jobs, getting some pretty good pay packages. We were making on average between $1,550 to $1,850 a week after taxes as PTs. We thought this was really good. We heard there were some therapists out west, especially in California, making $2,000 plus. Things were pretty good. Everything was really steady. In 2019, the reason we actually started really digging into some of the changes in the job market is because in 2019 they came out with the PDPM and PDGM changes, which affected the way that billing and payment systems worked for home health and skilled nursing. So we started to see a little disruption in staffing because there were new Medicare changes that came. So this is when people started to be like, oh gosh, like job numbers aren't quite the same as they were. Pay rates maybe aren't quite the same because these managers and people that were staffing for home health and skilled nursing were like, oh, we might take a pay cut in our therapy department. So maybe we're going to have to cut the salaries or the pay or maybe even furlough some people in SNF and home health. So this was coming right into 2020. So we were hoping that was just going to be a small bump in the road, and then mid-2020, everything was going to go back to normal the way we had known it from 2015 through 2019.
And not only did we think mid-2020 would go back to normal, we thought like February, March of 2020 is when things were going to turn around. And it's so funny to think back now because I remember having conversations at CSM 2020, the PT, what does CSM stand for? Combined Sessions Meeting. Yeah. We were there in February talking to all the travel companies, and they were like, all right, well, things were kind of tough from PDPM, PDGM, but it's starting to pick up right now. And we were like, all right, great, the market's going to be back to normal. And so obviously we know that didn't happen. So I think of the job market almost as like a long division sign. I don't know if there's a term for the long division sign, but like before COVID, it was like coming along like this, and then it started to dip at PDPM, PDGM, and then it like completely fell off. And then it recovered quickly, and now we're up here plateauing, right? So it's like a long division symbol.
I have no idea what you're talking about, a long division symbol.
You know what I mean? Like you put.
It's been a long time since I've been in a math class. I don't know what you mean. And also for the people who are listening on the podcast later, what Jared's doing with his hand to make like a thing, I don't even know. But
there was a plateau before, dropped off a lot, came back up. Now we're at a higher baseline, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, so just to give you guys that background, things were really bad in 2020. Obviously, permanent therapists got laid off, travel therapists got their contracts canceled. There were almost no travel therapy jobs for like pretty much all of 2020. I think right towards the end of the year, it started to pick back up. And then in 2021, we started to see a rebound back to what we would consider like a normal amount of jobs. And then at the end of 21 and the beginning of 22, we saw jobs skyrocket, especially for PT and somewhat for SLP. OT, PTA, and CODA kind of have just been steady, not really great, but not bad either. But for a while there, for 6 to 9 months, we were seeing crazy rates for PT, crazy rates for SLP, just thousands of PT jobs. So we're going to bring you what's kind of been happening now in the last few months. Basically, it seems like it's leveled off more. Pretty much a common trend for all the companies that we asked. They said it's just been steady. Like not not really crazy high like it was there for a little bit, but definitely not low by any means. So they all said it's pretty steady.
Yeah, I was looking through all this data. One thing that was a little different this time than prior updates. So normally we say there's a large range in number of open jobs. I mean, you'll see that in a second. And normally we say, okay, well, bigger companies usually have more jobs, smaller companies have less jobs. And normally it's almost like stepwise. You can see that the bigger the company, the more open jobs they have. And that makes sense because a bigger company they're able to reach out to more clients and gather more clients around the country. This time though, for whatever reason, and it's probably because things are kind of leveling off, some of the medium-sized companies or sometimes even smaller companies have just as many jobs as the big companies. So this is the first time we've ever seen that. Not exactly sure why. I would imagine it's because things are leveling off. But anyway, that was just like a difference this time compared to every other market update we've ever done.
Yeah, I will also say, and this is going to be a trend throughout this video, that we got some really differing answers on questions like what number of jobs do you have for each discipline? What settings have the most jobs? How are things for assistants? How are things for new grads? And the trend that we're seeing is that basically some of these companies focus on certain disciplines and settings more than others. And so one takeaway point we want you guys to bring away from this video is that it's really important that you work with multiple companies because we got varying answers across multiple companies. We've always said it's a good idea to work with 2 to 3 or even 3 to 4 recruiters at different companies. And it's a really good idea if you guys reach out to us and ask us for advice for which recruiters we would recommend because we have these this inside scoop on which ones might have more SLP jobs, which ones might have more PTA jobs, which ones might have more home health jobs, which ones have more school jobs. Because it really varies. Like Jared said, typically you think, oh, big company, big numbers across the board. Well, some of them, the smaller companies might have even a larger number of PTA jobs because maybe they were just focusing on PTA more. And some of the bigger companies, like one of them, I would have thought it's a bigger company, I would have thought they'd have a ton of SLP jobs. They only have 100 SLP jobs, whereas the smaller company that focuses more on SLP has 445 jobs for SLP.
So the whole point of this is that your experience as a traveler can be really shaped differently depending on what companies you work with. And if you're a new traveler and you just reach out to some random company or say 2 random companies, if you're looking for something specific, say your discipline and the setting that you're looking for, some companies have way more jobs than others. And so you might think, oh, the market's actually not good at all, but it might just be that you're talking to a company that doesn't really specialize there, but they're not going to tell you like, oh, we don't want to work with you. They'll still try to help you, but you just won't have as many options. So that's something just to think about. Companies vary widely.
Yeah, definitely. So if you guys do want to get connected with any of the recruiters that we recommend, if you want us to take a look at your personal situation, highly recommend you go on our website. If you just go to traveltherapymentor.com/recruiters, or if you just click on the top menu on our website, traveltherapymentor.com, we have a recruiter recommendation form there you can fill out. Also, if you're watching live, if you just want to comment recruiter on the video, we'll share the link with you. If you fill that form out, we'll ask you all the questions like which discipline are you, which settings are you interested in, what's really important to you, are you a new grad, those kind of things, and then we can help point you in the right direction.
Okay, so for numbers, like I said, there's a big range. It usually is the bigger the company, the more jobs they have. This time it was kind of scattered, but still smaller companies usually have less jobs on average. And
the question that we asked them is, what is the average number of jobs you have open right now for each discipline? So that would mean if they opened up their database right then and said, this is how many openings we have in the whole country.
So for PT, the range was from 420 to 900 open jobs. That's a little bit less than, like, say, 6 months ago. But, I mean, that's still very, very high numbers. Compared to pre-COVID, that's much better. OT, 115 to 425. So I think that's about the same as it was maybe 6 months ago. SLP, 100 to 1,300. So SLP is the one where I was like, man, look at this difference. If you work with a company that only has 100 open jobs as an SLP, you might think the job market's not great right now. But there's companies out there that have 1,000 or more open SLP jobs. So it really depends. For PTA, the range is 65 to 175. And for CODA, the range is 30 to 100. So again, this varies a lot depending on the size of the company, depending on what they focus on, what area of the country they're looking at. Some companies focus on certain area, like certain locations in the country. Others focus on certain settings or disciplines. So it varies a lot.
We were kind of saying like, we think this and that, but I was just realizing I can pull up the data from a few months ago. I wonder which one should I pull up and we can just compare.
Let's look at
April 2022 or
July 2022.
July 2022. So I think this would be like, 6 months ago, right when we had pretty high numbers. So 6 months ago, the range for PT was 500 to 1,300. Right now it's 420 to 900. So it's gone down just slightly, but that's still a lot of openings for PT. And we were hearing across the board, almost all the companies said they need PTs. Travel PTs are in high demand. So if you're a PT who's watching this, you are in high demand. All the companies want you. So it's a good thing. So even though we're down just slightly from 6 months ago, they're still 500 to 1,000 roughly.
Yeah, OT, SLP are pretty similar to where they were 6 months ago looking at this. PTA has, for the most part, picked up a little bit, but still pretty close. And CODA is almost exactly the same as it was. So for the most part, jobs are very close to where they were 6 months ago in terms of total number of open jobs.
I'd say they just seem like they're down just slightly from where we were kind of at our peak, but still really solid comparing to 6 months ago.
Okay, so then we asked, how does the job market in general compare to where it's been recently? So like I said, we were thinking that going into the second half of 2022, things would slow down a lot, and that did not happen. So we also thought going into 2023, any of you guys that have been involved in the travel market for a while, usually going into the beginning of the year and right at the end of the year, there's a slowdown in the market. And a lot of that has to do with the holidays, has to do with hiring managers being off. Things just really slow down. People are trying to figure out their budget for the new year, and normally there's a big lull in the market. So we asked, how has that been, compared to the last 3 months or so?
They all said it's been pretty steady. Some of them did say like the last 2 weeks of December and the first 2 weeks of January, right around the holidays, they just had trouble getting companies to get back to them. And we also heard this from some travelers. We had a few therapists reach out to us and say that they were really worried because they had submitted for several jobs and they hadn't heard back about an interview. And I said, well, how long have you been submitting for jobs? And they basically gave us that time frame between like mid-December to mid-January. And I said, this is the time of year where a lot of those managers and people who are making decisions at the facilities are taking time off for the holidays. So they're just not taking the time to interview new employees. And I think everyone who spoke to us and said they had concerns by the second week of January, by like this week, they all were like, oh, I got a call back. I got an interview. And I got a contract. So it's just very common, right around the holidays. But for the most part, they all said that from October, November, December, and coming into January, the job market has been really steady.
Yeah, so that's a great thing. That's basically 3 straight years, 2021, 2022, 2023. There hasn't really been a major drop in January, which that was very common prior to COVID. So that's good news. If you were a therapist looking for a job in January, it used to be very hard. Now it seems to not be that difficult. So we'll see if that continues into the future.
If you're watching and you're a current travel therapist or someone who's currently looking for a contract, let us know if that was your experience. Did you feel like you had trouble hearing back from people? Were you able to get a job lined up that ran through the holidays? We usually recommend that. We usually recommend, if possible, have one that's just already starting in December going through January. Or even when the job market is really good, you can sometimes line up a job to start in January, but interview for it back in November, December. But not always, it just depends.
Yeah, and as we're going through all these numbers and stuff, if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask those in the comments. We'll go through those at the end.
Let's see, somebody says, Tyler said, we had a contract canceled that was supposed to start on January 2nd. We also had a terrible onboarding experience.
For the job we found instead. Time off and stuff made it hard. We'll on board in January again.
They said they will not do that again. Yeah, so it can be really tricky, and that's a really bummer that you had something booked in advance, but then it got canceled because then it left you scrambling around the holidays. So it's definitely a tricky time to find a contract. Not impossible, but tricky.
Yeah.
Okay. So remember how we said that we kind of always feel like there's like a pre-COVID job market and a post-COVID job market?
Remember the long division sign.
Yeah. So we're always kind of wondering, like, how are things compared to 2019? We use that as just like our basis because that's when we consider things to be normal. And the majority of them have said since last year, they've said that it's been way better than 2019. Or some of them have said it's about the same. It's like back to pre-COVID, pretty steady, pretty normal. And some of them even said they feel like it's way better.
Yeah, this answer was a little bit across the board. There was one company that said it was less still than 2019, but all the rest pretty much said it was the same or better than 2019. So we're back. We recovered from COVID. We recovered from PDPM, PDGM, and things are at this higher baseline now, which is awesome.
Yeah. And then some of them kind of went into which settings they felt like they were seeing more of, but we'll get into that in a minute when we talk about settings.
So then we asked, do you anticipate the job market, do you think it will continue to be strong for therapists in 2023? This is a question we get all the time. People that are thinking about leaving their perm job, they want to know, okay, the job market's good right now. Is it just going to be good for 1 month or 2 months? I get one contract and then, it's going to be terrible again. So we always ask this in each job market update, and the results were overwhelmingly good. Even the companies that were kind of pessimistic on the numbers now compared to pre-COVID, all of them think that 2023 is going to be a great year, which I have to admit makes me a little bit nervous, because whenever there's a consensus on something, I'm a contrarian. So I think I do think it'll be good. If the last year is any indication, doesn't look like there's anything on the horizon that will slow down the job market or pay packages or anything like that. So hopefully that's a great thing. Inflation's coming down. So everyone's optimistic. We're optimistic as well.
Yeah. Many of them say they think it's just still going to be a good year, still going to be steady. Some of them are projecting even more growth in their therapy needs for this year. And I think some of them, that's because they're looking to bring on new clients. They're branching out into new settings, that sort of thing, to find more work that needs travel therapists. But most of them say that travel therapists are still in high demand, and they anticipate them being in high demand all year.
Yep. Okay, so the next thing we asked about was what settings currently have the highest demand. And this answer was the most all over. Literally, of the 12 companies we got feedback from, every single setting was represented in what they thought was doing the best right now. So this really shows that some companies specialize in some areas. They have a ton of jobs in that area. Some specialize in other settings, and it really varies. So everything from schools, outpatient, home health, SNF, hospital, everything was on there.
Yeah, I think it'll be good if we just read through, I'm not going to say the company names, but just so you can see how each individual company gave a different answer. So one company said schools are their highest demand, especially for SLP. And again, I think this is a company that especially focuses on schools, whereas there's some companies that just don't staff schools at all. They only staff medical. They say this particular company says acute and rehab are consistent. They are seeing increased home health and skilled nursing orders.
Another one said hospital and skilled nursing have the highest need right now. Another one said skilled nursing, home health have the highest needs. Another one said outpatient ortho has really picked up a lot, as well as inpatient.
And I know this company is a smaller company that specifically focuses on a lot of direct clients, and that's why they have a lot of outpatient ortho. That particular company, they would probably say well, yeah, we have plenty of SNF jobs. Everybody has SNF jobs. They're out there. They're on the databases. They're on the VMSs. But they were saying as far as their direct clients, they're focusing on a lot of outpatient, and they have a lot of outpatient openings. They also have outpatient/inpatient mix.
Yeah.
She said they are seeing more inpatient rehab jobs, which is very nice because we know there's a lot more people looking for inpatient rehab jobs. They're kind of harder to come by. So when she says more, it's still not up there with all these other settings, but that's good to see some more.
And then the rest of the companies mostly were saying skilled nursing, which, we kind of know. Skilled nursing jobs are always out there. It's just that most travelers try to avoid those jobs, so they stay up longer.
Yeah. Yeah, I think skilled nursing and home health were probably the highest, and then the ones that focus on school, that's pretty high, and then outpatient and acute are kind of steady.
Yep.
So, but it's good that they're seeing a lot of jobs in a variety of settings, because we know you guys all like to work in a variety of settings. We prefer outpatient. We know there's some people who only do home health. There's a lot of therapists that enjoy skilled nursing and inpatient, and there's some people who only work at pediatrics. So.
Yeah. We were just talking about before the video that Whitney and I always did outpatient. All of our contracts almost have all been outpatient unless we really had to settle on something. And back when we were traveling, taking constant contracts, 2015, 16, 17, there was very few outpatient contracts. And now I feel like this is kind of the golden age of outpatient PT contracts. There's a lot of really high paying, great jobs out there that just didn't exist. I mean, we were usually choosing between very limited numbers back then. So if you're an outpatient PT, it's a great time to travel.
Yep. Diana said, why are those avoided? I think she means where we said about skilled nursing. In our experience, we've worked in a couple of skilled nursing facilities, and the productivity demands are usually what deter a lot of people. A lot of them want 90% or above, and in our experience, most of the permanent staff that achieve those numbers are cutting corners, are committing Medicare fraud, are just lying about their their time and their, including their documentation time and their billable time and all these other things that are just sketchy. And so a lot of times they're severely understaffed when it comes to the nursing and CNA staff. And so then some of those roles fall back on therapists. And so there's a lot of people who just really don't enjoy working in SNFs, us included. If it weren't for the management and productivity aspects of it, like if it was staffed better and there weren't such unrealistic demands, I don't mind at all working with that patient population. In fact, it can be quite enjoyable to work with patients in a long-term care or a skilled nursing short-term rehab. It's more just the productivity demands, but some people really enjoy working in SNFs and do fine in them.
Yeah, I always say there's probably 10% of skilled nursing facilities that are wonderful. They're really great places to work, and I actually really enjoy working with that population. Unfortunately, about 90% of them are unethical, and they're trying to push just minutes and billing, and nursing staff is like very burnt out, and they're not helpful, and for that reason, I think a lot of therapists avoid that setting.
Yeah. And Nikki conferred with us and said productivity is one of the reasons she avoids it.
All right, so the next question, this is probably what a lot of people are interested in. We asked about changes in rates. So that refers to bill rates that the therapist or the companies are seeing from the facilities, which translates into pay for us as the therapist taking contracts. And most of them said that the bill rates have been pretty steady. That was pretty consistent through almost all the companies. There was a few that said they're still going up, and there was a couple that said they were still going down. So
I think it really depends on which clients they are working with more often. And when I say client, I mean like which facilities. So like, for example, one of them said, I am seeing a slight increase in hourly rates for PTs and OTs. And she thinks that the hospitals are trying to stay fair and competitive. Whereas another one said, just the opposite, said they think that the rates are coming down in the hospitals and she's probably referring to down from when we had those really crazy high rates in like late 2021, early 2022, when they were receiving some federal government subsidies for COVID patients and those sort of things. We did see a handful of crisis rates here and there for travel therapists. A lot of you guys may have heard that there were a lot of crisis jobs and crisis rates for nursing. It happened way more with nursing and respiratory therapists that were working in critical life-saving units. We didn't see a ton of that for PT, OT, and speech, but we saw a few, and now those are all but gone. So some of those rates have just leveled back out to pretty normal, I think they would say.
Yeah, so from our perspective, we've got our hot job list. We kind of keep an eye on rates based on, the pay on that list. We've got the most jobs on that list we've ever had. And again, that list, if you guys I know some people go to it like, a few times a week when it's updated. That list is only a small snippet of the market. That's like, we have like, I think 180 jobs on there of probably if you include PT, OT, SLP, assistants, there's probably 2,000 or more jobs out there. So it's just a small snippet, and it's usually the high end. We mostly want higher paying jobs or exclusive contracts, things like that you're not gonna find with, if you're just working with one company, you might not have access to that job. So we wanna put those out there. What we've seen is that I would say on average, the pay rate has gone up, but you're also not seeing that really high-end $3,000, $3,200 a week job that you were seeing 6 months ago. So I think overall the bill rates have increased slightly on the average, but there's also not the extreme high rates that you were seeing. And then also there's really not that many extreme low rates anymore either. There's very rarely bill rates that are like $55 or $60 an hour. Usually they're $65, $70 on the low end and can be $90 to $100 an hour on the high end. So the average has increased, but it's sort of starting to level off now, which is fine. I mean, as long as it stays higher than it was pre-COVID, that's a great thing for us.
If you guys aren't sure what Jared was talking about with our hot jobs list, we usually post it like 3 times a week on our social media. So if you guys follow us on Instagram or Facebook, you'll see we'll say, hot jobs list updated. If you ever want to check it out for yourself, it's just on our website at traveltherapymentor.com/hotjobs. Again, that's just a small selection, 5 or 10% of some really great jobs. They're not all the jobs that are out there. Just to give you guys an idea of some of the great ones that are out there and connect you if you'd like to be connected. But as far as rates go, when we were working more consistent back-to-back contracts between 2015 and 2018, 2019, we were, like I said, making on average $1,500 to $1,800 a week after taxes as PTs. Now we see that most therapists are not accepting any jobs below 1,600 or 1,700 a week, and this is for PT, OT, and SLP. For assistants, your range is going to be more like 1,000 to 1,300 a week. So yeah, we definitely feel like across the board, most of the jobs are a little bit higher, more like instead of 1,500 to 1,800, they're more like 1,600 to 1,900. Now, there are still going to be some jobs out there paying 1,500 or so. It's just that people are going to be more likely to pass on them, especially PTs. If you have a lot of job openings that are 16, 17, 1,800 plus, you're probably not going to consider those. But do keep in mind, as we always say, the more particular you are on a setting and a location, you're going to back yourself into a corner where you might just have to accept what is available. So there are still going to be some jobs out there that are on those lower ends if you're being really particular about a certain place, like in the Midwest or the East Coast. Because every now and then we'll get people that'll come to us and they'll be like, well, I want one of these 2,000 plus jobs. And I'm like, oh, well, where are you looking? They're like, well, I'm only looking in the Midwest and I'll only work outpatient. And I would prefer it to be one-on-one outpatient. I'm like, well, you really narrowed down your search criteria, so you're just going to have to go with what's available. If you really only want to make 2,000 plus, you might need to go to California or go to some of these more higher rate jobs, just wherever they happen to be.
Yeah, it varies a lot, and you really have to take into account the setting you want, the area of the country you're looking at. If you're very specific, then you might not see these really high-paying jobs. But if you're open to anything, then you can get really high-paying jobs. Just keep in mind that these high-end jobs, like I said, they're 1% are above probably 2,500 right now, and they're still out there, but they're going to be very competitive. So if you have only 5 jobs paying really high, everyone's going to shoot for those jobs. So you're going to have a lot more competition. Whereas if you go for a job in the Midwest paying 1,700, probably no one else is even applying for that job. So just keep that in mind.
Yeah, in our opinion, if you can make 1,600 plus a week, as long as you're pretty savvy as far as your expenses and that sort of thing. I saw somebody had a comment about housing, which we can touch on later, responding to that comment. But if you can try to keep your costs pretty low, we still feel like you can really come out ahead financially as a travel therapist, making 1,600 plus a week. That's a lot of money. But it's just going to depend also on what your rent is and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Okay. So another question that we asked about the job market, again, we're going to get to any comments, any questions you guys have, please just go ahead and leave them in the comments. We'll go back and answer all of them. The next question that we asked about were, are there any recent changes in the COVID policies? Because we do get therapists coming to us asking, maybe they, have not had the COVID vaccine or they've not had a flu vaccine, and they want to know if facilities are accepting exemptions or if they're requiring it.
So overall, the answer was that places are more lax on COVID now, and I'm sure everyone has seen that. There's less masks being worn out places, less talk about vaccine cards. That's, for the most part, that's gone over the last 6 months. So they're saying that's pretty consistent with the facilities that they're seeing. Very rarely now are people being rejected for not having a vaccine. So, and then also boosters are not really that much of an issue anymore, except for certain states. So I think California, New York, a lot of the recruiters are still saying that those states are requiring 2 doses and a booster. And but for the most part, across the country, things are really dying down in terms of COVID requirements.
Yeah, I would say that the consensus was there are certain states and certain hospital systems that are more strict on it. So you would know that if you don't have the vaccine, you may have to present an exemption, or you may get declined if you don't have it for maybe for California or for certain hospital systems. But a lot of outpatients, especially private practices, may not require it or may not even ask, or they'll be more likely to accept an exemption. And then certain states will be more likely to accept an exemption.
Yep. Okay. The next question we asked about was contract cancellations. This is another really important aspect of travel therapy that I think a lot of new travelers overlook, is that travel therapy in a lot of ways is really great. And I think most travelers would say that, but there's also things about it that are not great. And contract cancellations is one of those things that is not great. If you get in a situation where you have a contract lined up and you're going there and your contract gets canceled while you're on the way, that's terrible. If you get to a new job and you're working a week and then you get your 2 weeks notice, that's really terrible. So that's something we always want to keep an eye on. Make sure that there's not a lot of contract cancellations, because that really does impact people's experience of travel therapy. And luckily, almost all of them said that there was no increase and that cancellations are at historically low levels. Some said 2% or less of jobs are being canceled, which is pretty good. And that kind of goes with our experience as well. Cancellations are fairly rare. They only happen to us one time between the two of us out of many years of traveling, so it's not real common, but just something to keep in mind. It does happen. Right now, compared to all the other times in the past, it's a great time, and cancellations are not very high.
Yeah, the most typical reason that you might have a contract canceled is if they were looking for a permanent therapist and they were just going to fill in temporarily with a travel therapist, but they ended up finding someone to take the permanent job, so now they don't need the traveler anymore. Or sometimes if there's a reduction in caseload. So suddenly, a couple months ago, they put out the advertisement for a travel therapist. They had a big caseload. They thought they needed an extra hand on deck, but then they realized after they hired you that they actually didn't need extra hands on deck, and their caseload is down. So with them saying that cancellations are pretty steady, it means that there's still pretty high demand for travel therapists, and that caseloads are pretty steady. There's not a whole lot happening to make those caseloads unpredictable, such as COVID. So yeah, that's a good sign.
Yep. We've got a few more questions that we're going to go over. If you guys have any questions or comments, I see there's some questions and comments right now. We'll go through those at the end. And if you guys could like this video, leave us a comment, let us know what your experience has been, what your plan is for 2023. We really appreciate that. The more engagement, the more people see these videos, and that helps everyone.
Yep, absolutely. We appreciate it if you hit that thumbs up button. All right, so next we asked about whether new grads were having a good experience with getting placed. And again, this answer was a little bit varied depending on the company, because we know that some of our recruiters are more inclined to work with new grads than others. There's just some recruiters that don't necessarily focus on working with new grads. Maybe they're not quite as good at providing that mentorship and guiding them. But for the most part, most of our recruiters are good at working with new grads, and most of them said it's been very good. They haven't had much trouble, especially for new grad PTs. Some of them did say that it's a little harder for new grad OTs, and that's just because of there's more competition for the OT jobs. There aren't quite as many OT openings as there are PT openings, so it's going to be more likely that an experienced OT is going to get that job. So if you're a new grad OT, you have to be a little more flexible just on the setting and location where you're willing to go, but it's definitely not impossible. As far as SLPs go, usually once you have your Cs, you're good to go. None of the companies really care. They need SLPs so bad. So as long as you have your 3 Cs, you're good to go. Now, if you're still in your clinical fellowship year, there are going to be less facilities that are able to support you with the mentorship that you need and the hours that you need, like the supervision. So it is a little trickier to find travel SLP jobs if you're in your CF year. But once you're out of your CF year, new grads are totally good to go. Yeah, so good time for new grads, especially PTs. We say this all the time. We traveled as new grad PTs, but it's not for everyone. So think about your situation. Think about how comfortable you are with your skills if you're a new grad considering travel. It's not for everyone. Make sure that you're very confident and comfortable going into your first contract. Make sure you pick a good first placement so that you have a good experience. Yeah, if you are a new grad therapist that's thinking about getting into travel, especially new grad PTs, reach out to us. We can definitely connect you with recruiters that are very good at working with new grads. A lot of them have had new grads go into the same facilities year after year, so they can point you in the direction of some really good contracts and facilities they're aware of that'll help you have a good experience. Okay, the next question we asked was, how's the market for assistants? Has it improved at all? Because anybody that's been watching these job market updates for a while, the assistant market has really struggled since like the end of 2019. It's been 3.5 years of pretty difficult market for assistants. Yeah, ever since PDPM and PDGM, I think some of the first people to take cuts in jobs and be furloughed and that sort of thing were PTAs and CODAs, unfortunately, and then COVID just prolonged that and made it worse. Yeah, so a little bit of good news. PTA jobs, almost every company said that PTA job, it was picking up. There's more PTAs now that can find contracts. Some even said that they think that the PT rates are so high now that some facilities are looking for PTAs instead to do treatments and just have like less PTs doing evaluations and reassessments, discharges, and then PTAs doing treatments. So there are more openings for PTAs. That's a great thing. CODA, on the other hand, has been about the same. It really has not changed for like 2 years now. Since early 2021, the market has been very, very stagnant. I mean, as you see with the OT numbers are also not great compared to PT and SLP, and CODA is just, the same. It's less than PTA numbers. So for CODAs, it's still a very difficult time to travel. If you do want to travel as a CODA, you have to be very lenient on setting and location. You have to have a lot of state licenses. There's no OT compact yet, which makes it even harder.
but you need to have a lot of state licenses in states that have jobs commonly in order to have a chance of finding something.
And we really would not recommend that new grad codas travel because there's already so much competition for the very few number of coda jobs, travel jobs in the country, that you're going to have a very poor experience trying to find consistent work as a new grad coda. So we highly recommend you get at least a year of experience if you're a new grad coda before thinking about travel. We generally recommend the same for new grad PTAs. But if you are a new grad PTA who feels very confident, if you had a variety of experiences in clinicals, maybe if you already have maybe 6 months under your belt or so, and especially if you're in a compact state as a PTA and you have more options of states to go to off the bat, then you may be well suited if you feel confident to start earlier as a new grad PTA. But in general, we think it's a good idea to get about a year experience just to be more competitive. It's not that you may not have the skills yet, it's just that you're going to be more competitive since there's a smaller pool of jobs. Whereas for PTs and somewhat for OTs and definitely for SLPs, there's just a huge number of jobs. So a lot of these are going to be more willing to take a candidate who is a new grad if you feel confident in those disciplines versus the assistants, unfortunately.
So the last question we asked was just any general insights about the market or anything that they wanted to highlight. And for the most part, most of the companies were saying, things are pretty steady. They're looking at 2023 as being another very good year for therapy. The therapy market, nursing market is slowing down. Respiratory therapy has slowed down a ton. Therapy is staying strong. So most of them think that it's going to be a good year, and they're looking forward to placing a lot of people and very optimistic. So that's a great thing. Like I said, I was very pessimistic going into the second half of 2022, but apparently I was wrong, and the market is still very good.
Yeah. I'll just read off a couple of the little tidbits that they had. Most of them just said, in general, things are steady, things are good. Some of them just had their little tidbits that they just want to throw out there. I'll give the recruiters the floor for a moment. So some of them are looking at the long term, and they think that technology and automation are coming more into our space, which is a good thing on our end. It may not be necessarily the best thing for the recruiters, but on our end, we like to have more transparency, more ability to use apps and websites to apply to jobs without always having to go directly through the recruiter. So probably a good thing, but it'll definitely, just continue to change the market how it is a little bit.
Yep.
One of our recruiters wanted to just remind everybody to be good with your communication with the recruiters, and we always encourage this too, especially when you're working with multiple. Just have open line of communication with them, be honest with them. Don't try to, pull the wool over their eyes and try to go around their backs. Just let them know, I'm submitting to multiple jobs. This is what I'm doing. It's okay to do that. Just don't lie to them. Don't accept a job and then decline it the next day because you got a different offer. Just put them on hold and say, I'm sorry, I am waiting to hear about this other one, so forth and so on. We talked a lot about this in the past about just an effective way to work with multiple recruiters. Just communicate well. Yeah. Be honest and upfront, just like you would want them to be with you. Be that way with them. And, almost every recruiter nowadays, especially any that you get from us, they know that you're working with multiple companies. That's fine. If you're submitting with jobs with a different company, they are fine with that. Just let them know so they're not like going out of their way to trying to find a bunch of options for you when you already have a job that you're interviewing for that you're probably going to take. Just be honest with them on that. Yeah, just have good etiquette and good professionalism. That way you can hopefully maintain a good relationship with that recruiter, but also you don't want to burn any bridges with any of the facilities because you'll find that therapy is kind of a small world. Some of these companies, like bigger companies, are buying up smaller companies. So there's hospital chains, skilled nursing chains, outpatient chains. And so if you burn somebody on a travel job, well, maybe they won't want to work with you even at a different facility in a different state if it's the same company. So just make sure to be professional and maintain a good relationship with the recruiters and with the facilities.
Yeah.
One of the recruiters said travel is still a great place to be, especially if you're someone who wants to do this long term, especially if you're someone who's willing to be a little flexible, go where the jobs are. They still think that it's going to be very good in the coming years. This recruiter said healthcare is not recession proof, but it is recession resistant. And that's how we felt all through COVID. We knew that the jobs were going to come back because we know that the services we provide are valuable and essential. People are always going to need healthcare. They're always going to need therapists. So even though there was a lull in the job market, there's always going to be a need.
Yeah, and I would say the last thing that someone said was facilities are cracking down on time off and productivity. So if you're very specific in your contract about like needing to take a week off during the middle of the contract, that less and less facilities are willing to accommodate that. Not that they won't, there's still some that will, of course, but it's less than it was 6 months ago or a year ago when there was way more jobs and fewer applicants for each job.
Yeah, and what it really comes down to is just supply and demand with any of this stuff. So if you are someone who, let's say you're a PT who has a lot of experience, several years of experience, several settings, you've been a traveler for a little while, you have a couple of different state licenses, and you're willing to work in a couple different settings, you have your choice of thousands of jobs, hundreds of jobs. So you can afford to be a little more picky, because even if you go to one facility and say, I need these hours, this pay, these days off, and maybe they can't make that work because of their staffing situation. Like, we've been in a situation before where we were the only PT in that place because it was rural, and they just couldn't afford to give us the time off because they wouldn't have a PT at all to cover. So if we really needed that time off, that would just be a job we would have to pass on. It's no big deal. We'll just go into this next opportunity. However, if you're a new grad, CODA, with one state license who only has experience in one setting, you're not as competitive for these travel therapy jobs. So you can't afford to be as picky. You see what I'm saying? So there's just a spectrum on your experience level, the settings you're willing to work in, the number of state licenses you have, so forth and so on.
Yeah, and that was one thing I forgot to mention when we were talking about the rates, is one of the company owners said that in these more rural jobs, places where the high-paying jobs aren't, like, for example, Missouri, Kansas, Nebraska, those types of places, if there's an opening, they're not getting many applicants for those jobs because, like I said, there's a lot of competition for the high-end jobs, not as much for the moderately paying jobs in the Midwest. If you are willing to take one of those jobs, he said that right now, we're in a situation where you can try to increase the bill rate on those jobs. So they might advertise it, say, at $70 an hour. But the recruiter, if you have a recruiter that understands the situation, knows they don't have many applicants, they might be able to go to that facility and say, hey, you're not going to get anybody for 70, but I know that I've got this candidate that might take the job if you pay $80 an hour bill rate for this job. And that might translate to an extra $200 or $300 a week for you as the traveler. So there's situations where if you're willing to go to these places that are less desirable, you can really kind of name your terms in some situations.
Yeah, and if they do have at least somebody else to cover, you might also be able to work in negotiations on time off and those sorts of things. It'll just depend on if it's like really a one-man show there or not, because we've literally worked at some places where they're like, we'll pay you whatever you want, but we can't give you the time off because we don't have anybody else to come and do evals if you're off. They might not even have a PRN person or anything, but that's not all places. Some rural places will at least have a PRN person or one other PT, and they need a second PT or that sort of thing. So just work with your recruiter, build a good relationship with your recruiter. They can definitely help you, especially if they're an experienced and savvy recruiter. They can help you navigate these situations, but you need to work with them and be professional.
Yep. Okay, so going through some comments, Victoria said, unfortunately, housing is becoming less affordable in my opinion. Yeah, it really depends on where you are. There are places now where the housing market seems to have peaked in terms of both rent and sale prices, and it's starting to come down. In our area, for example, rent prices are starting to decrease. Housing sales prices have definitely decreased. So there are areas where that's starting to reverse, but there was a period there where it was like nothing but up for house prices and rent prices. So, and you might still be in an area. So say if you're in Austin, I think prices are still pretty out of control there. Or Miami, I think prices are still really out of control there. But there are areas where it's starting to decline. So it's very dependent on where you are in the country right now.
Yeah, and we would highly recommend anytime before you accept a job, just do a cursory search, just get an idea of what type of housing opportunities are in that area and decide if the pay rate is worth it to you based on the cost of living. We've done a couple of videos here in the last 6 months about that. If you guys go back and look through our videos and our podcasts where we've talked about, is it still worth it financially to be a travel therapist? I think we did one with that exact title. And we talk a lot about, how you need to look at your personal situation, your budget, your finances, what your fixed costs are back home, how cheap you can live when you're on assignment, because it's not the same across the board. There are some therapists who are seriously making bank. They're keeping their costs low at home. They're keeping their costs low with their travel assignment. They're making $2,000 plus a week. They're paying off their loans. They're putting money into savings. They're making so much money. Now, there are some therapists that are like, well, I have a dog and a spouse and a kid, and I always have to have a 3-bedroom house, and I have a mortgage backup. So you're not going to make as much money in that situation after you account for your expenses. So it's not the same for everyone, but there are ways that you can be savvy and make it work financially for you.
Yep. Dan said he agrees. Housing is becoming more expensive. Landlords taking advantage of travelers, I feel like. Yeah, that is definitely an issue, because if you think about it as a therapist, we're really lucky to make $2,400 a week, and on the West Coast and on the East Coast, $2,000 or more is really good right now. Whereas nurses for 2.5 or 3 years have been making insane pay rates. And so to them, a 1-bedroom apartment or a studio where they're paying $1,500 a month, it's like, oh yeah, who cares? I'm making a ton of money at this job. So a lot of what we're competing against is other healthcare workers that have higher rates than us. And so that does make housing unaffordable. And it's not necessarily the landlords taking advantage of, which of course that does happen, but it's more the competition. If a landlord lists a place for $2,000 a month and they get 20 applicants, next time they list it, they're going to increase the rate. If they list it for $2,000 a month and they get 0 applicants, they're going to drop the rate. So a lot of it's supply and demand, and unfortunately we're competing against, in a lot of cases, the much larger travel nurse industry that is also making more money than us.
Yeah, we found that when we were searching for housing this summer in Alaska, I contacted dozens of landlords, and some of them were like, we have offers to pay more than what we have it listed for because they really need the housing. And I'm sure these were nurses that were making double what we were making. So
yep. Nick says he's making over $2,000 a week in Maryland, and that's why he went there in January. Yeah, so that makes sense. Like, there's some really high-paying jobs on the East Coast we've seen, and yeah, sometimes it's worth it to put up with an area you don't really want to be in if you can make a lot of money there, especially if you can find reasonable housing.
There's give and take when it comes to travel therapy. There are people like Nick who are willing to go to a place that they don't really want to go in the season that they don't really want to go in for the money. So it just depends on what's most important to you. If it's that you really want to go to the most desirable area, sometimes you can find good pay in really desirable areas, but not always, and vice versa.
Yep. Diana says, why have you guys said $20 an hour is in the gray area? So I think she's talking about taxable pay. The reason we say, there's a lot of gray area in travel therapy, or in the travel healthcare industry in general, when it comes to like how much of your pay should be stipends, how much should be taxable pay, how far away from home do you need to be. There's a lot of gray area, and the more you do it, the more you realize that there are very few black and white answers. But the reason we say that is because, let's say that you had someone come to you from the IRS and they said, hey, I see here that you took this job and you were only getting paid $20 an hour for this job, and you have a doctor of physical therapy degree, for example, and it looks like all the other jobs in this area are paying $35, $36 an hour. Why did you take this one for $20? Now, from their point of view, they're not taking into account your stipends, because that is a reimbursement for your housing and your meals. So what you would have to justify in that situation is why you agreed to take a job paying so low when there might be other options paying a lot more. So that's just something to think about. I'm not saying you can't justify it. Maybe you really can. But that's where the gray area comes into play, because let's say you take a job at the extreme for minimum wage. If you get audited, the auditor might talk to you and be like, why would you take a job for minimum wage? You have a doctorate degree. This doesn't make any sense. And if it doesn't make sense to them, that's when they start asking questions about wage recharacterization. And then you have to be able to justify it. Otherwise, you and the company together are taking wages and moving them to non-tax stipends in order to make more money, which is not legal. So anyway, just think through that situation and think about whether you can justify it. And that's really the main reason.
If anybody who's listening, if you were confused by all that, we just put out an article a couple weeks ago on our website called Taxable Pay as a Travel Therapist, and we addressed this exact topic. I would highly recommend you guys read that. I can link to it at the end of the video in the comments. But it's definitely, there's no clear black and white answer, but it's very typical for a travel PT, OT, SLP contract to have a $20 an hour taxable rate with the rest going to stipends. A lot of ours have been $20 to $22 an hour. We do know therapists that will have the recruiters move the money around and put more into the untaxed stipends so they can make more after taxes and drop that taxable all the way down to 15. We've even heard of like 13 or 14. We've tried to stay in what we felt like was a reasonable range up in the 20s, but we've also heard some people that are very risk averse and they want that to be more of a livable wage, like more of an actual PT wage, and they want it way up in the 30s just in case they were ever audited. So it's really a matter of how comfortable you feel, but it's very important that you do your research and you understand these pay packages and you understand the reasoning, because if you ever were to get audited, you're the one who has to answer for it. But if you just take the recruiter's word for it, well, now you could be in trouble if there ever was an audit. So check out that article. I'll link to it.
Yeah, and the big thing to research there is wage recharacterization, and just look into that and think about what your comfort level is. She says, I have a specific example. I was told $22 an hour and gross weekly would be $21.19. The net take home 20% net tax rate is $19.43. What does this mean related to tax rate? I mean, $22 an hour on a bill rate that is, able to pay you $19.43 take home, I think that's fairly reasonable. I think where things get very iffy is if it's a very high bill rate, which means really high stipends, and you take a really low taxable rate. So say you had a job that was paying $2,500 a week take home, but your taxable rate was only $16 an hour. That's when things get kind of weird, and you have to talk to an accountant, make sure you get a professional opinion on things like that. But I think in your situation, that's probably fine.
Yeah, and I'm not exactly sure what you mean when you say, what does this mean related to the tax rate? It may be that you are asking that you don't really understand the way the pay package is set up and that sort of thing. If that's the case, we have a lot of resources on our website that explain the breakdown of how the pay packages work. And the same goes for anybody else who's watching or listening that doesn't yet understand how travel therapy pay works. And if this has all been very confusing to you, we have several articles on our website and several videos where we explain the breakdown of how the pay packages work, what part's taxable, what part's stipend and non-taxable, how the money can be moved around. I would highly recommend doing your research and understanding that.
Yeah. Victoria says, why do some agencies say they have no ability to negotiate a rate? There's a few reasons this might be the case. One, they might just be referring to the fact that they know the job has a lot of other applicants and the job is not going to accept if they try to push for a higher bill rate. And this goes into what I was saying about if you have a job that's less desirable that you're submitting to, a lot of cases the recruiter or whoever you're working with can actually push for a higher bill rate on that job, which means that maybe the job is advertised at $1,800 a week, but if they can get a $5 increase in the bill rate, maybe they can pay you $2,000 a week, which that's great. So they might be talking about this job I know is going to be competitive. I know they have other applicants. They're not going to consider a bill rate increase. That's one reason. Another reason might be that they've already, they know the bill rate won't increase, and they also have given you the very highest pay they can right off the bat. We prefer that to be the case. We don't want recruiters that we have to negotiate a lot with and be like, well, you said 18, but could you do 18.40? And they're like, well, I could do 18.20. We don't want to do all that. It's a hassle. If you're trying to find good jobs and find housing, it's already stressful. We want to get the highest pay rate right away and no negotiation. So it might be that they already offered you the highest pay rate, whereas some other recruiters you work with, maybe they haven't offered you the highest pay rate and they try to get you to take a lower rate hoping you won't negotiate. And if you do, then they'll say, okay, I could pay you 50 more, and then you take it. So there's a lot of reasons why that might be the case.
Yeah, it's important to know that when you're looking at contract negotiations, you have to dig a little deeper. You have to understand where the money comes from and who you're actually negotiating with and what you're actually negotiating for. So what Jared explained is the two places that more money can come from. Either they can go back to the facility being the hospital or the clinic that's offering the job, and say, I need you to pay a higher bill rate so that I can pay the therapist more. That's the first place more money can come from. The second place would be that the recruiter and the company, the staffing company, take a lower margin, so they keep less of the pie and they give you more of the pie. So there's two levers there that can be pulled and adjusted, and sometimes they may just not have control and they know that they're not going to be able to change either one, whereas sometimes they usually have a little more wiggle room to at least squeeze out $5 extra or $10 extra a week, maybe $50 extra a week on the margin part, but they know they're not going to be able to go back to the facility because of the competition of the job, so forth and so on. And then negotiation also goes back to supply and demand. As Jared alluded to, if the job's really competitive and there's somebody else who's willing to take it at that rate already, you may not have a lot of room for negotiation. But again, these topics we could go on and on for hours about. We've written a lot of articles and done a lot of videos about those too, if you guys want to go do some more research about that.
That was a really good explanation. Whitney does a good job explaining things. I feel like I just rant along and then none of it makes sense. And she says, let me explain what he's trying to say.
Well, I think that we talk about this all the time and pat ourselves on the back because I think that we each have our own strengths and I think that we work well as a team. And I hope you guys maybe also feel that way. Over the years, we've really gotten better at doing videos and interviews and presentations together because our brains work different. And he might be on, one thought, line of thought that's really good, and I may just be able to pick up the pieces where he might have left something out, or vice versa. So yeah, hopefully we did a good job of explaining it as a team.
Yeah.
It makes me think of Step Brothers. We're going to be interviewing as a team today.
Yeah.
The movie, anyone?
Yeah.
Okay.
Making videos or doing presentations by ourselves is not great, but if we have time to think while the other one's talking, it's a lot better.
Yeah. We've honed it over the years. Gosh, we've been doing these Facebook Live videos for how many years?
Coming up on 4 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we've obviously been in the travel therapy industry coming up on 8 years. So hopefully we've got some knowledge at this point to share. And sometimes it's just a matter of getting it out to you guys, all the knowledge that we do have.
Yep. So that's it for today's video. Again, if you guys watching later, listening on the podcast, if you have questions or comments, leave them in the comments below. Send us an email. We'll always answer your questions. We pride ourselves on trying to get back to every email and message that we get, even though sometimes it does get out of hand. At least right now we're at home, we have plenty of time, but on the road sometimes it's difficult. But we try to get back to all the messages and emails within a day. So if you have any questions about travel therapy, if you want recruiter recommendations, check out our website. If you want to look at our hot jobs list, see what's available right now, check out the website.
Yeah, I'll respond to those of you guys that said in the comments that you want to get connected with recruiters. I'll send you the link to the form so you can fill it out, and we'll get you set up with some recruiters.
Yep.
And I'll also link to a couple of those other resources that I talked about in the comments as well.
Yep. We've got a lot of new content coming. We have a lot of guest posts that we're working on right now. We're also working on our own articles. So the next few months should be a lot of new content, and we're really excited to be back in it, be back home, be in a normal routine, not traveling currently. So it's really nice to be able to work and get some stuff out. Again, if you guys could like this video, we really appreciate that. Share it with any tagged friends that might be interested in travel or interested in the job market right now. That's very helpful for us.
Yep. All right, guys, thanks. Stay tuned for the next video, but we definitely have a lot of articles coming soon, so check those out on our Facebook and Instagram. We'll share the links.
Yep. All right, take care, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.